What is up, guys? It's John Fig, and this is Pace Around the Yard and Talk About Macroeconomics Hour. So I've been heads down for the past couple weeks. I'm sorry I haven't posted, but I've just really been getting my buy list ready and just going down the rabbit hole because it is coming and you want to be prepared to buy when the time is right, and it's going to come this year. And so what I wanted to do during this talk is I wanted just to talk about macroeconomics, what's happened from 2020 until now, and then where are things going from here and the predictions that I have on what it's going to move forward and what it's going to do. And so I want to talk in just kind of like a human element way of going through it, just talking like stories about anecdotally how it works, because once you kind of talk like a human through all of this, and I'm going to throw a bunch of data at you as well, but it's important to understand it from the anecdotal side, because once you kind of see human behavior at work, it makes sense how macroeconomics work. And it's just all human incentive structures and how they kind of play out when you throw money at problems. So without further ado, starting from the top, if you look at 2020 and 2021, we hit COVID. So we hit COVID, everyone was locked inside, unemployment rate went through the roof, and we're just like, how do we keep this thing from having the wheels fall off? So we send out all these stimmy checks and we sent out trillions of dollars into the economy. And what ultimately that was like is like a sugar rush. So all of a sudden, all of these people have money, and it is instant injection of energy into the system. So people that didn't have money are then spending that money at Walmart or Target or Amazon, and it's bumping their corporate earnings, which pushes stock prices higher. Number two is the people that didn't need that money are then trading in the casino house of the stock market, or they're trading their favorite crypto because they have this extra money that they didn't really need. And so that's what they're going to do with it. So we went through a massive wild ride for 2020 and 2021. And then ultimately, once we realized that inflation was no longer transitory because it was actually, embedded across the entire world in every country because we were all doing the same things, the central bank decided that they needed to act. And so just to explain the Federal Reserve and the central bank and kind of what they're doing is they have two mandates. Their two jobs are they need to keep inflation low at 2%. It's probably going to be 3 or 4% when we're all said and done as the new rate, because that's kind of how World War II worked. That's how we inflated our way out of debt, was allowing a little bit more inflation. And right now we're sitting at around like 8% on paper, but really it's around 12 to 15% once you factor in CPI data with new housing numbers. It's just how they factor it. Long story short, it's way higher than 8%. And then the second thing is that they need to keep employment high. And right now we've got 3.6% unemployment. So everyone is in super good shape. They all have the best jobs they've ever had. Raises are high and everything is going well. So that mandate's good, but inflation's out of control, so they have to attack it. So what do? They increase interest rates of the Federal Reserve, the federal funds rate. And that increases borrowing rates across the whole board for banks, for people, on credit cards, and that slows spending. But because people are so wealthy right now that it's not slowing spending, people are still traveling like crazy. So the only way that you can reduce aggregate demand, and demand, once you reduce that, that's how inflation slows down, because inflation is created by too many people chasing too few of goods, which then pushes up prices. And people are just buying like crazy. And so the way that you make people stop spending is you make them feel poor. And how do you make them feel poor? So I'm gonna use a simple example. Let's say you have a person that has $1 million. So you got a person that has $1 million, 500,000 in the stock market, 500,000 in a house, right? They got a $1.5 million house or whatever. And the stock market drops by 20%. So if the stock market drops by 20%, then all of a sudden you have 400,000 instead of 500,000. So if you go from $1 million to 900,000, do you feel poor? No, you don't feel poor. And so that's why it has to be more. 20% is not even close to enough to reduce aggregate demand. So the next thing coming up is housing. And people are not looking at the housing data. They do not understand it. And I'm just gonna put it super simple. So right now, if you look at Boise and Bend, Oregon, they are the canary in the coal mine on what's about to happen. So currently right now, they are sitting in Boise, Idaho, where a ton of remote workers went. Their price cuts in the past 60 days have gone from 3.2% to 11.2% of all homes have price cuts, like more than 1 in 10 in 60 days. So just shooting through the roof. And it is going to convert into inventory very soon because there are so many few people buying, because houses are 50% more expensive that no one can buy. And if no one can buy and everyone just continually lists every Thursday, then all of a sudden you're going to get a glut of inventory. And what does a glut of inventory do? Drives prices down. So if all of a sudden we have a 20% correction in housing and you had a $1.5 million house that is now worth 20%, you're looking at 1.2 million, and you had 500,000 equity and now you only have 200,000 equity, then all of a sudden your net worth with the 20% down in the stock market, you got 100 grand you lost over there plus 300 on the other side. So now you just went from $1 million to 600,000. You starting to feel poor now? You starting to worry about spending? Yep. And that is how they're going to go through this process, because they need to make people feel poor in order for people to stop spending, in order for inflation to get lower. And it's already happening. But then if the system overcorrects, which it's looking like it's going to do, because you have to catch up so quickly to try and drive down demand, because you have a bunch of different forces working, right? The other is we have an upcoming election coming. So people want to be elected. And you want to know how people don't get elected? Is when inflation's high. Because if inflation's high, then the working class is pissed, because 40% of Americans cannot handle $1,000 emergency. And if they can't handle $1,000 emergency, how in the fuck are they going to handle, meat spiking by double, or gas prices going from $3 a gallon to $6.50 a gallon? It's untenable. It's untenable for anyone to be able to survive in that kind of environment, which is why people don't get voted in. So they're aggressively trying to push on that rate in order to get reelected. So you have a lot more pressure on that side in just a number of months to do it, which is going to lead us more towards the overcorrection side of the house. And so what ultimately happens right now, you're already starting to see it. You look at, type in layoffs in Google and just see what comes up in the news. So you've got all of these startups, and I'm going to go into the venture capital side and just kind of take you through each anecdote. So an example is stock market drops by 20%. And if stock market drops by 20%, then all of the private companies that are funded by private equity and by venture capital also have to take a 20% price cut when they go to raise money, which means that all those valuations go down as well. And rich people did not get rich by doing stupid things. And they see the writing on the wall. They understand when the market's in their favor and when it's not in their favor. And right now it is not in their favor, so they're taking gains. So they are not reinvesting their profits back into venture capital. And if venture capital that has had all of this funding for the past 10 plus years in this market with quantitative easing, if they don't have that money, then they can't fund their portfolio companies. So where does everyone work at tech, right? They work at all these companies that are backed by Y Combinator and Andreessen Horowitz and all of these major venture capital funds. And if those companies stop funding people, then all of a sudden, probably 3 out of 4 of all tech companies right now are going to die within the next 2 years. And if they don't get funding, which they probably won't, and then companies right now, VC companies, have to pick the ones that they choose to fund. So public companies are not going to be able to raise funds that quickly because more money is leaving the system. Private companies are not going to get funding, which means that they have to either survive with profitability or die. And that's going to lead to job losses. And so right now you've got these consumers that, if I want to tie both the real estate market and the job market together, people don't like to lose power, especially if they haven't had power to begin with. And that's a new concept. And so employees have generally and historically not been in kind of the power seat. And for the past few years, it's really at a place to where employees call the shots. It's whatever you want is what they get. And when people get used to that, they do not like to go backwards. And so we are now entering a place to where employees are being called back to the office and they hate it, right? So I have friends right now that are in Miami, and all of a sudden the inventory rates of apartments are starting to increase in Miami. And it's because they're all getting called back to Goldman Sachs. And you have all of these price cuts that are happening in Boise and Bend. And magically on the 23rd, all of these Apple employees are going to have to come back to the office. And so everyone is going to run. It's just like watching human nature happen. So then everyone's like, well, fuck these guys. I'm going to go get another job. And I'm like, great call, right? So then they try to run to Airbnb and they fill up every single position that exists on Airbnb, because Airbnb is a remote-based company, which I'm a super big proponent of remote companies, but at the same time, the analytics software does not exist. So then people fall through the cracks. And it's going to be the future, but we're not there yet. And so I think for the next couple years, I think that people are going to come back to the office. And then as people continue to push for remote culture and we get better at utilizing software with productivity, tracking all of these different things, we're going to get better analytics and it will be the way of the world. But it isn't now. So people are going to come back to the office. Some companies will allow remote work, but then everyone's going to take all those positions. And then as hiring freezes occur, then people are not going to be able to move jobs. So they're going to be forced to liquidate their houses. So I think normal areas are going to be mostly fine. Let's say 10 to 20% drop in real estate, things along those lines. It might be a little worse, but I don't think too much worse than that. Number two is the areas that had remote places. So an example is, I keep on going back to Boise and Bend, but the reason why like a Boulder, Colorado can stay higher in value is because it's an hour from Denver, so people can drive. But people from Bend can't drive to San Francisco, which means that they have to sell their house or rent it out. And it's like, who the hell in Bend, Oregon can have a $2 million house that they can pay on besides an executive at Apple? That's not going to work. And so you're gonna watch a massive drop on that side of the house, and it's just obvious to see what's about to occur, and you just have to like look at the world and where it's gonna go and then think about how it's gonna work. So then once all these employees, all the walls come down, everyone at all remote companies have filled up all of their positions. All of these other companies are starting hiring freezes. Those hiring freezes later on this year, when they miss corporate profits, because right now 40% of Americans can't pay anything with inflation. You're watching credit card data go straight up. More credit cards have been opened in the past 2 months than have ever happened. And so when you have that, people are taking out more debt, which means they can't afford the things that they're buying. And that's going to lead to companies missing corporate profits. And you just saw it with Walmart and Target. They have said that their data is coming in worse. They're writing their earnings reports and they are reducing their projections for the future. And that shows where we're going to go. So you've got the canary in the coal mine on real estate and price drops. You've got the canary in the coal mine with Walmart and Target. And then basically what I think is going to happen is Q2 results are going to come out and it's going to be a bloodbath. Like people are going to realize that people aren't buying shit that they can't afford anymore. Like Apple, Tim Cook dodged the question 3 times from the same analyst at Apple saying, hey, what are you going to do for your earnings for next quarter? Didn't talk about it. Didn't talk about it at all. And you know they're going to miss because China is in a massive recession right now. And it's worse than our housing collapse in 2008. And it is widely undocumented about the ghost cities. So you're gonna have people in China that are not gonna be able to buy these iPhones. You have all of these supply chain crackdowns, which are 2 major headwinds. And then you have the market pricing in like an 11% earnings growth for 2022. Stop smoking crack. This is not gonna happen. And so you have a wildly optimistic market that is turning into a wildly non-optimistic market, and things are ultimately self-fulfilling prophecies. And the fact that what will eventually occur is if people believe that the market's going to get worse, they're going to stop spending, which then is the thing that turns it in the other direction. And once that ultimately happens, you're going to have decrease in aggregate demand, which is great because it'll kill inflation. But then ultimately you're going to have companies missing corporate earnings. And if they miss corporate earnings and things are not going in the right direction, then what is ultimately going to happen is they're going to start firing people. And they're going to fire people because there's 2 ways to make more money, right? You increase your revenue or you decrease your expenses. So if you can't increase your revenue, then you have to decrease expenses, which is why the layoffs will start. Then you'll watch unemployment start rising. And when you see unemployment start rising, you will see more people selling their houses because that's where the greatest amount of wealth comes from. And then all of a sudden you'll see more houses start dropping in price as more inventories hits the system. And then all the people that decided to change jobs last minute that were just like, hey, screw my boss, I'm gonna go over to this other place, they're gonna be first to go because it's FIFO. Or it's LIFO rather. So it's last in, first out. If you were the last person to be hired at your company and you want to do remote, you are going to be the first one out the door when that happens, unless you're an unbelievable talent to where they absolutely can't live without you. So work super hard in order to make sure that you're that person. And so I think this is going to be one of the biggest buying opportunities of our lifetime. I think that I think honestly we could have a 40 to 50% crash in the stock market because we have to get back to PE ratios that are rational, and we have lived in a world to where we don't have rational P's. We got companies without earnings that are trading at the most absurd valuations ever. You have companies that may or may not ever make profit. You have companies like Tesla, which is an unbelievable company, but at the same time, they're trading at a 100 PE ratio, and if they're growing 100% year over year, that's a really hard benchmark to just continue to do year after year. No, not normal companies can do that, and there's so many headwinds that it's going to be really difficult to move forward. And so I think we're going to see a real estate crash of 10 to 20% in kind of major metro areas. I think we're going to watch 40 to 50% in these areas like Boise and Bend, because they just don't have the fundamentals to support it. And I think those are going to be great areas to buy into, because I think that, we've seen the data, we've seen the writing on the wall. We know where people want to move for remote culture. So when remote culture becomes the norm with the metaverse and all of these things coming over the next 10 years, 5-10 years, it's going to be the future. So I'm down to buy in these areas like Miami or Austin or Bend, because those are going to be areas where people are going to move back to when this is more widely accepted in culture, and it's going to be great on that side. And then you're going to have real estate, which is going to be a buying opportunity. You're going to have stock market, which is going to be huge as a buying opportunity as long as you're out of the market during that drop and that capitulation. And there's a lot of forces that are pretty incredible that are going to continue to be themes going forward. So if you look at blockchain technology, you've got 80% CAGR growth over the next 10 years, which 80% growth year over year, that's absurd. You have cloud computing, which is 29% year over year. So if you're betting in the right companies like the Microsofts, Googles, Microsoft, Googles of the world, you're going to do well long-term, because that's a large core part of their business. Also Amazon, because they've got AWS, and they're just going to continue to build out these services that'll grow, because data is the world. And then it's the resource of this century. And then the other thing is you've got cannabis stocks. So cannabis stocks are trading at major discounts compared to their relative counterparts in alcohol. And as soon as Safe Banking Act passes, these companies are going to go up by 2 or 3x, no problem. And so there could be further to fall. And if there is, I'm going to keep buying. And then the other thing is you're watching huge plays that are going to happen in AI and the metaverse. And the truth is I don't know what company is going to be the company that wins in the metaverse. I think it's going to be tough to beat Facebook. I know that everyone hates them, but it's just if you invest $10 billion a year, who in their garage is going to beat someone like that? These are the most sophisticated artificial intelligence engines that have ever been created. And it's difficult for me to believe that some random person is going to do that. I would love to see it happen, but we'll see. But at the same time, what I do know is that AI and the metaverse and all of these different things require computer chips. And the more computer chips that you have, the more these companies that produce are going to do well. So what I want to do is I want to sell shovels in a gold rush, because I don't know who's going to find the gold, but I sure as hell want to sell shovels, which is why I really like NVIDIA. I really like AMD, because they are creating the foundational components with chip manufacturing that builds the possibility for the metaverse and for cloud computing and for artificial intelligence, because those are going to continue to be major trends that are going to move forward, and it's going to require physical infrastructure to do so. So those are kind of the things that I'm seeing. Sorry, I hit a bunch of different sectors going everywhere from bonds to the Federal Reserve to, to real estate to the stock market. But that's kind of what I'm seeing right now. That's what I expect to come. I do think that there's more room to drop in the stock market over the next few months. So I think it's just be smart, cash up, make sure that you're ready and have the right exposure that you want, but have a defensive position, and then get ready to buy when the time comes. So leave a comment. Let me know what you guys think. I'd love to hear what you're thinking on this side. But that's my current thought process, and that's what I'm gearing up. And I'm going to put my money where my mouth is, and I'll be letting you know what companies that I'm buying, what are the things that I'm most interested in, and it's going to get a lot more regular from here. I got my honeymoon coming up for 3 weeks, so I'm going to be a little bit off grid for a few weeks, but I'm excited to talk more about this. I'm going to make a ton more content on this side, and thank you guys so much for your time and attention. I very much appreciate it. I'll talk to y'all soon.